Good afternoon, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Am I audible? Can you hear me and see me okay?
Sure can.
Yep.
Awesome. Hi, Brendan.
Hello.
Are you ready for the Veeam party?
No party like a Veeam party.
There's nothing better. Nothing better than storage. So I'm just getting my stuff set up here. Is anyone else from your side going to be joining?
I think Wade is going to join us. However, he's out working on somebody's computer at the moment.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and get started and he'll just jump in when he gets back.
Sure, no worries. I'll be presenting in just 1 second. I gotta log in. Oops. Let's try this again. Yeah, Sora informed me that she wasn't able to make it, so we had to do the meetings and switch the invites. So,
Yeah, I noticed that the phone number in the link changed to yours.
I just found out, so I was like, "Oh, okay, no problem. You know, we'll do it that way. That's no biggie." So, all right.
Flexibility is key.
Yes. I see you got the Mountain Dews lined up. That's
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Code Red Mountain Dew, I don't think I would have graduated Oakland University. That just wouldn't have happened. Okay. Do you guys currently get any kind of like console access to your existing backup software or anything like that? Like for the existing management of it?
Somewhat. It's Shadow Protect. So we've got the access to the interface on the servers. We
Can you edit
don't
the,
have. Sorry.
Yeah, can you edit the backup jobs and
Yeah.
schedule them? Okay, all right.
Yeah, we don't have much insight in the offsite repository portion of it.
Oh, okay.
But
Cool.
that's kind of one of our annoying pain points with them right now.
Got it. Yeah, you'll get the Warp Core access with this setup. So, and I think I finally got the capability of sharing on this now. So I'm good. Okay.
Oh, you cloned yourself.
I did. Yes. Let me stop the video on that. or no? Okay, I'm getting myself
Because
confused.
there's
Yeah,
two of you in the
in the video. Okay, hold on. Is it gone now?
no, just in the list of connected users.
Okay.
on the
I thought you were getting two mirrored videos.
No, no, no,
Where's
no.
the second one coming from? Okay, yeah, because I'm trying to share my screen. Do you guys see my
Yeah.
screen? Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So the Veeam backup and replication console is essentially not only the central management hub of the application itself, but in most cases, in most environments, it actually holds all the roles for the entire backup ecosystem. So and it's designed in a very enterprise-like fashion where each component, should you need to, you know, each component is designed so that you can expand in multiple directions to accommodate the kind of workload sizing that you have. For example, when it's connecting into a virtualized environment and you know, you start adding virtual machines and adding hosts to your you know, to your VMware environment, you may need to relocate proxies or add proxies or add additional processing power behind those proxies so you can ingest and capture that data at a faster rate. Another option is if you run out of space on your repository, you can create a role on another repository, inventory it, and then just add it to the backup platform. So compared to like some small business tools, it's you know, it's incredibly flexible in the deployment. Are you guys over 50 virtual machines at the moment? No?
No.
Okay. All right. So essentially this deployment would be just simply one installation on likely your existing backup repository, and just all the roles would be installed there. It uses a SQL database to hold the backup jobs and all the essentially all the history of the items that were backed up, and you know, it's all self-contained into one location and one install by default. So the first thing that you'll do once the Veeam application is installed is inventory the items that you want to back up in your environment. If you're running just straight ESX hosts, you would just inventory the hosts themselves. But in most cases, if you're running vCenter, you can connect it into vCenter and it'll inventory all the virtual machines in the environment. So as you add virtual machines, nothing needs to be done at that point. It just pulls it all in. That's quite different than on Shadow Protect, because that product, you have to actually deploy the agents on each of the servers that you want to set up. So nothing kind of gets missed in this configuration, because, you know, if someone adds a virtual machine or removes a virtual machine, you don't have to mess with the agents and adjust the backup jobs. They'll just get, you know, re-inventoried and pulled in from vCenter. Okay, and the inventory view is pretty much, you know, if you have standalone hosts, they'll show here. And if you have any resource pools configured, they'll show up in the inventory console. Any questions on the VMware aspect of this?
Mhm.
Okay, cool.
No, that seems pretty easy.
Yeah, it is. I call this the interface is not as intuitive as I'd like it to be, and it has gotten better over time, but I find it to be very Russian in the sense that it's a little bit overly complicated than it needs to be, but it's definitely getting better. You know, it's really designed first for scale, and then usability is kind of like a little bit of an afterthought. But everything is pretty much segmented. You know, once you add all the vCenter hosts, they'll show up in here. This kind of gives you the backup infrastructure tab, just kind of gives you an understanding of you know, all the roles and where they're located on what servers, and you know, essentially in your environment, all the roles would just be simply on one machine. So, you know, there isn't a lot of you know, things that need to be changed. Let's go into the home. So when you first launch the application, you have the capability of creating multiple backup jobs, or you can also modify the backup jobs through here, and you'll get a status of, you know, what's being backed up, the speed of that backup, how long it took, and you know, each step of the process, should you need to troubleshoot something, or should you need to see where there are delays in the backup job. Veeam is great. They've had the bottleneck option since I think version 2. So it essentially gives you a pretty good idea of if there's any bottlenecks in the environment. And most of the time, it's usually just destination. When we're working with companies less than 50 virtual machines, it's going to be like the slowdown is going to be at the NAS box or the local repository where the data is ingested.
Mhm.
It gives you kind of a play-by-play of what happens, what it's inventorying, what speed it goes to, whether it's using application aware backup or not. It's all here, so it's pretty clear. I'll go through the steps of creating a new backup job, and you have options of deploying physical agents through this interface as well. So if you do have physical machines, you're not limited to just virtualize.
Okay.
And it works really well. It's been around for 3 major releases, and it's very mature at this point. Because Veeam was, Shadow Protect was physical only up until just recently, and they're still not native to the hypervisor, which it is one of the reasons why they're kind of left behind a little bit. Whereas Veeam went virtual first and then started going backwards and adding physical machines because people were requesting it. Okay, so we'll go through the steps. There's multiple ways of actually selecting what virtual machines you want to back up. You can do this individually. My recommendation for your environment is just to select the entire cluster. And then that way it will essentially grab everything, and nothing will get left out. And then you can also exclude certain virtual machines through here. I can say, hey, this app server that we restored is actually a non-production, which is right here. And now my backup size went down. I can also exclude specific disks from a particular virtual machine. And that's helpful as well if it's like a backup of a backup, like if you're taking, for some reason or another, a backup of the partition and adding it somewhere else, you can edit it. And you can just say, hey, I just want to grab the OS disk. Okay. And you can add additional items in here. You don't have to just do, it can be a different cluster, and you can have the virtual machine set up here. And the second step of this wizard is to select the backup proxy. And as discussed, it'll just be on the same location as where the install is, and the repositories. So you'll have just the local repository. It'll tell you how much space is there. And you have a selection of restore points. I typically don't do restore points because a lot of people confuse restore points with days. They'll think I have 30 days, but they're running the backups twice daily, and that only means they have 15 days. So depending on your retention policies, you can do 30 days. That's pretty common. And that will keep, a standard full backup, which is a VBK file. And then it'll start creating incremental backups using change block tracking at the hypervisor. So it's smart. It minimizes the amount of backup to the time the backup windows happen, because Veeam doesn't have to reinvent the wheel here. It's just going to ask VMware and say, hey, what changed since last night? And then it updates the disk map, and anything that's been changed, it just captures the delta. And that's it's a very space efficient way of storing the incrementals. And I don't recommend going more than 90 days if you're doing forever incrementals. There's policies just like in Shadow Protect where you can transform the backup chain and make a separate chain for monthly backups or monthly restore points, quarterly restore points, yearly restore points. So they call Veeam's concept of this is called grandfather, father, son. So essentially forking the job out to multiple independent jobs. There's some advanced options on here, like controlling block size. Most people just leave the defaults and it's fine. There's also storage integration. We leverage storage integration in our environment with Pure Storage. It works phenomenal. I don't recall, what kind of SANs are you currently using in your environment?
All of our storage is local on the machines.
Is local, okay, all right, got it. If you were using a SAN from any of the major SAN vendors, you essentially can offload the snapshotting from the hypervisor itself over to the SAN array, and it minimizes the stun impact on virtual machines. It's virtually no stun at all. and it still maintains application aware consistency. You can set a distribution list for notifications. So it'll fire if you want it to send you an email that it's the backups were good, the backups were bad, or the backups failed. It can get pretty spammy. So I recommend that you fine tune these settings. It's Veeam is like Goldilocks in the sense that, it's constantly like, if anything is wrong or misconfigured, or if there's like a blip in connectivity, it's going to send you like 50 emails. So, I recommend that people just do the send notification on error, and then, poke your head in every once in a while and check the backups to make sure they're working. Get a interval set up where you're actually running the backups from the Veeam repository and making sure that they're healthy. And I'll go through that as well. These settings talk about change block tracking. I always recommend enabling it. There really isn't a reason not to. And since we're not using integration, I have to worry about that part. Secondary target is where best practices come in. So you have the capability of defining either a secondary location, like a storage repository, NFS share, something somewhere else. For our cases, we always bundle this service with offsite storage to kind of complete the deliverable. And you would simply, see our cloud repository as a target, and then you would create a secondary option there. And I'll go through that as well. Guest processing, it's, if you have any databases, I think you guys mentioned SQL. Essentially, my first question is that, in the event of a restore, who's going to recover SQL? Is it going to be the database administrators, or is it going to be IT? And if it's going to be IT, then application awareness should be enabled.
You assume those are different people? Come on now.
Right.
We're not that big.
Well, I mean, I get into these, I get into these fights because sometimes even if you're using an application, like the application developer will not, they want the logs and they want the actual database files. And they have their way of doing it, and they won't accept a rollback from a backup software. So that's happened before, especially with certain vendors. But essentially, you can do them both. You can do application aware processing so that the Veeam software will just instruct the VSS writers in the operating system to just quiet down while they're taking a snapshot, and all the IO stops, snapshots taken. So that way, in the event of recovery, the database is remounted cleanly when it's restored. You can choose to keep the logs either truncated at backup, or you can keep them as is. And it just really depends on how you're handling it. How are you currently? Are you just shipping the SQL logs and the backup using like a maintenance plan to like another location or something?
They are on the same server.
Okay.
They're housed on the SQL server.
Okay, no problem. So probably like another folder or partition, and it dumps the BAK files in there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. At least this way, and that's a perfectly acceptable way of doing it, because if you're using the backup software Shadow Protect will scoop up all that data anyway. So if you restore the server and the database is not healthy, you can roll it back from the the BAK file that's local. And we do the same thing too. Some environments will create a partition and then just allow the service account for the backups to access it. And then that way, if Ivan ransomware comes in, it's not gonna, it can't see that partition, so it can't really do anything with it unless it flips the service account. And then we will also have the application aware backup on the local on-premise repository for recovery. And then if both repository and server are encrypted or damaged or whatever in any way, then we can connect to the cloud repository and pull just that data down if you want.
Okay.
And that's actually one of my favorite features. Scheduling, it's pretty straightforward with any software. You can get pretty complicated with things with PowerShell if you want. It'll generate a PowerShell command that will let you kind of control this even further. But for the most part, it's just like, run at 6 o'clock at night or whenever it's the most appropriate time to do it.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Actually, can we go back real quick to the guest processing?
Yep.
Do you end up using the guest file system indexing at all?
I do. I like it.
I do too. I just wasn't sure how well that scales. On my home lab, it's fine.
I haven't had too many issues with it unless we've got really dense file servers. And people just don't want to wait. And when you look at the Veeam log, sometimes the guest processing takes a while, and people will just say, "Oh, this is taking 13 minutes. I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait to go to the next step, so I'll just disable it." And I'm just like, it's kind of nice to have. When you're in that restore option, it's nice to be able to just search things very quickly in case you need it. But yeah, it's on your environment, it won't take that long at all. Anything else about application aware processing?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. You can define service accounts. You can define local accounts. SQL accounts. However you're managing that on the database end, it'll accommodate. And it's Oracle aware, SQL aware, pretty much every transactional workload out there. Okay. Sure backup is it's a rather complicated feature to set up initially, but it's kind of worth its weight once you get it set up. Sure backup essentially sets a schedule where you can mount the existing backups, present it back to the hypervisor to run, and it kind of runs in its own like little isolated lab. It will, Veeam understands the underlying data that's inside that backup, which is one of my favorite features about this software and why we've been using it for over a decade, is that it puts you in full control over the restore process, and it understands that, hey, you're backing up a server, and this server has things that we want to get off of it. Okay, Wade's here. I'll go ahead and I'll let him in. Hi, Wade. Welcome.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
No worries, no worries. I'm Steven from UBX Cloud, and we're just going through the Veeam party right now and stepping through each of the options and the components of the software. If you can just confirm that you can see me and hear me okay, and my screen share, great. All right, cool. All right, awesome. So I just completed the demonstration of the creating the new backup jobs. It was essentially pretty straightforward, but I'm more than happy to run through it if you'd like. Again.
It's fine. Just continue.
Okay, you got it. So to go back on the second feature, Sure Backup essentially creates an isolated bubble where your virtual machine, your backups are mounted. Veeam will present those backups back to the hypervisor using the storage that's on the backup server. So it's not going to touchy anything in production. The VMs turn online, and then based on what's inside that virtual machine, Veeam will check those components and then report back to you if they're healthy. So if it's an AD server, it'll power up the AD server first. It'll check the health of the domain. It'll check the health of the objects, and then make sure that server came up fine with no problems with the SAM database or anything. If it's a SQL server, it'll make sure that that all the databases are online and that they're in a healthy state. They're not dismounted, they're not dirty, and it'll report whether it failed or not. File servers, it'll just confirm that it's serving. It'll ping certain internal ports and make sure that SMB, things of that nature are enabled and functional from that part. And for application servers, it'll check to make sure, again, if SQL or other transactional items on that server are there and available. If it can't detect what's on that server for some reason or another, or it's a workload that it doesn't recognize, there is a lot of configurability on checking services from starting, pinging certain ports, and even running your own script. In some complicated scenarios, like with SAP, we have to run secondary tests to confirm that the database is actually in fact healthy. Same thing with Oracle. If there has been a lot of modifications outside of Oracle's norm, then we would essentially get these scripts from the vendor and plug them in there. But the Sure Backup option is just a way of kind of automating the testing. So that way you can say, hey, we take a full backup, or we take a backup and an incremental backup, and we hold for 30 days. We mount that backup, monthly on a Sunday. We test all the health of those virtual machines from a restorability standpoint, and here's the report. And it's very helpful. Like I said, it does take a while to configure initially, but once it's configured, it's there for whenever you need to use it. There's also an additional component here with Sure Backup. You can also use it as a lab and testing environment. So you can, before you do some crazy upgrade in production or any changes, you can essentially create a virtual lab that leverages the same concepts that Sure Backup does. And it's useful, especially for developers where you say, hey, I need you to roll back my ERP system to like last night, and then I need to run some queries and see if it blows anything up. So you can do that without touching production, and you can provide, the way that Veeam does the thing where it like rewrites the packets and it essentially like obfuscates the network addresses and stuff. So you can have it on its own private network, but that's still accessible from one IP. So you can remote desktop into those servers and check those queries, and that's usually how it's done. So lots of flexibility for testing things before you put them in production. I don't know if you guys have any problems with that, but it's kind of nice to have. Anything else before I move on from Sure Backup?
No.
Okay, cool. So backup copies. Backup copies are essentially a separate job that reads the local backups and then creates a new chain on the service provider side, so the cloud service provider. This is a very unique concept to Veeam and how they configured this, and they configured it in a way to put security and performance in mind first. So there's no separate mechanism required to have to offsite this data. Veeam simply uses port 443 for encrypted SSL and a control port 6190. So essentially, all modern enterprises allow this kind of traffic back and forth. It's standard, and it's essentially proxied and protected. It'll look just like web traffic when it leaves the environment, and it's very fast and very efficient. So it's what essentially happens is that the backup the backup is read, the chain is read, and then the new chain is created on the cloud provider side, and there's no, it's strictly like a one-way type of communication. So you're not connecting over any kind of VPN. There is nothing that could potentially infect you on, I'm sorry, nothing that if you were infected could crawl up into the cloud repository because of the design. It's completely air gapped. So you simply just get the ability to deposit the data in there. And once it's there, it's not going to be changed. It'll provide you with like metrics on the speed and deduplication and things that it's doing to kind of let you know how fast the transaction is going across the wire. And that's helpful for troubleshooting any kind of problems. As you can see, the processing rate for like these are pretty high. Most offsite backups are scheduled off hours just because you'll be consuming a lot of bandwidth in your environment when this is happening. And it follows the same constructs of, we have a VBK file, which is the full, and then we have incremental backups that are sent daily over to it. And then you can select in the backup copy job, the type of merges or requirements based on your restore points. So and you can schedule the days that it happens. I like doing periodic copy. This is the option that was presented pretty much in the last 5 versions or 4 versions, major versions in Veeam. And it just lets you do it on a specific time of the day. And I simply just say look, every day at 7:30 p.m., run your backup copy job, and it's consistent. If you do copy mode, it'll just be constantly checking to see if there's been any action on those local backups. So if you do like a one-time backup or a manual backup or an out-of-band backup, it'll start uploading. So some people don't realize that, if they do that, and then all of a sudden their WAN connections are bottlenecked and everyone's complaining about not being able to do their jobs. So I recommend periodic copying.
Stream their music.
Yeah, exactly. Stream their music. Yeah, we got to make sure Pandora works. Okay, it's got to work. All right. So, and then from the backup copy jobs, you can select the source backup jobs. And for how we do it, we try to keep each backup job like under a dozen virtual machines or under 2 terabytes in size, just to keep the fragmentation down, and to kind of minimize any kind of issues with corruption, chain corruption. And it's served well for our purpose. So sometimes if you poke into our environments, you're going to see 30 jobs, right? But it's just kind of, we feel very we feel that it's a good practice, and it's a little bit more efficient when it comes to transmitting these across the wire as well. So the target's the cloud repository, and then from here you can actually do your grandfather, father, and son transformations. So very similar to Shadow Protect. You can set, we need a quarterly backup and 1 yearly backup, and you can do this on the cloud side. So if you don't want to, if you don't want to consume a lot of local storage, you can do that on the you can shift those long-term retention points to the cloud provider. And there's additional options, but you can do storage level corruption, which essentially continuously checks the chain on those schedules and just confirm that the cloud chain is healthy. And then there's options for like fragmentation or defragmentation and certain activities that help with restores, speed up restores. So if you've got a heavily fragmented chain that's very long, it's probably a good idea to enable those options. Okay. Data transfer, if you're WAN challenged in the sense that you have low bandwidth, we can create, we can leverage the technology that's built into the Veeam software for WAN acceleration. Essentially, you create the WAN accelerator on the local side, and then you create one on the destination side, on the cloud provider side. When that happens, it essentially takes a little bit more time, but it's similar to change block tracking. It'll say, hey, what do I have on my source repository? And what do I have on my destination repository? And then once I figure that out, I'm only going to send what's different. So it essentially, it's a very efficient way of sending a lot of data and a lot of changes without having to actually resend those large VBKs or VBI files. I would say, if you're under 25 megabits per second, it's probably a good idea to enable WAN acceleration, especially if your backup jobs are over 2 terabytes. So some people have different numbers, but you can also enable it and see if there is a bottleneck in the backup copy jobs. You can enable it and see if it helps. It's purely an option, and it's a pretty good one. This has actually helped us transfer tremendous amount of data with pretty poor WAN links. And then scheduling, same thing. This is really used as like a blackout period to make sure that your offsite copies aren't killing your Pandora streams. And you can select the hours, like anything between 8 a.m. and like 6 p.m. No touchy, no upload, and it's not going to affect anything. And that's like typically that's how it's used. It's normally not used where you're doing the opposite. So you can enable or deny during those different periods. Okay. Any questions about backup copy jobs?
So if I wanted to keep, say, a year's worth of backups on the cloud, and then put like last year's on a portable hard drive and take it to the bank, is that relatively easy to do here?
Yep, you can set the grandfather, father, son schedule here to set the mechanism for those chains, and then you can copy. You would create a copy job that would essentially copy that chain from the cloud repository down to your local backup target or your USB hard drive or whatever.
Okay.
We also offer a service called Restore to Door. And it's typically used for when there's a bandwidth constraint and there's a recovery that's needed. In our cages in the data center, we have the capability of essentially copying that data to either an external hard drive We have 3 sizes. External hard drive is rare, but we do that sometimes. NAS boxes, we've like a 4 unit NAS, and then we've got like a 16 unit NAS. We call it the Jesus NAS, because it's usually, if it arrives, it's usually saving people. So so depending on the amount of data that's being sent, the appropriate NAS device is used. And we don't charge for it like some providers. It's all a part of the service that we provide. And our justification was just simply like, if you need this data fast, we can get you your data back as quickly as possible, whatever makes the most sense. And then that's fine. And we can do the same thing for these kinds of one-off restores. So you can just make a ticket and you can say, hey, I'm going to ship you a drive, or send me a drive, and I want to stick it in the safety deposit box. Then our team will do that.
Okay.
We'll take the ticket, we'll copy the data off the repository, and you've got a chain that you can do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
Cool. Wade, do you have any questions on this?
Sorry.
Brendan?
No, it all seems pretty straightforward.
Okay, cool. Right. Let's see. On the backup tab, it simply just gives you a breakdown of the backups that you're taking. It'll essentially provide you with a list of the backup jobs, and then the corresponding restore points that are in there. So that's the method that I typically use when I'm restoring something, is I decide where I'm going to be restoring from, and then I can select the restore point from there. So I'm going to select this backup job, and it'll expand it. That's a bad one to select. Okay, let's do this one. That's another bad one. That's better. Okay. So, I've got 4 virtual machines that are inside this particular backup job. The backup job is local, and here are the restore point counts that I have. As you can see, this restore point is shorter than the rest of them because I can tell by the naming of this server, it's a POC. So it's just a proof of concept server. So it's new. Within this backup job it's pointing to files that are on the local repository. So if you want to get more details, you can dig into the properties of the backup job, and you can see the original sizes of the VMs, and then the health status of the increments in full backup. And then you can also, they just added the copy path option, but that was pretty awesome. You can select copy path, and it'll give you the path of the location of those files if you need to do anything with them, copy them or anything like that. If there's incrementals that are missing or corrupted or invalid, when you rescan the repository, when you initiate a rescan, it'll check that, and then it'll report back to you and say, these incrementals have been removed, or these incrementals are bad, and essentially recreate your chain, or either recreate your chain, or essentially letting you know that this is where the last point of your data is. And then my favorite part. So we can talk about the restores. So Veeam is the Swiss Army knife of backups, in my opinion. And like I mentioned, it knows what the underlying data is on that server. So it'll only present to you the restore tools that are needed for that particular type of server. So the server that I have selected is an Exchange server. So when I right click on it to see my restore options, it should provide me with Exchange only options like mailbox restore, and mounting the mailbox elsewhere, and those kinds of functions. So I right click on it, and then these are all the options of recovery, and I'll go through each of them. Instant VM recovery is probably the greatest thing on the planet. It essentially leaves the backups where they are on the backup repository, and it essentially opens that backup up in a read-only state and presents it to the hypervisor for consumption. So the business case would be, my production SQL server is corrupted or encrypted. I powered off the VM. I want to recover this one, the one from the most recent backup, and but I don't want to overwrite in production. I don't want to do anything in production now. I just want this VM on as quickly as possible online. So the instant VM recovery will mount the storage from the Veeam repository and mount that VM and power it on, and it won't have any kind of involvement with your production system until you're ready to move it into production. So it's very fast. It's much faster than restore, because you don't have to copy databases over or restore changes on virtual machines. You can just do an instant restore and it's available immediately. And then once the instant restore is up and running, I mean, it takes like a minute, essentially, even with large virtual machines, because it's essentially just powering on. Once you want to migrate it back into production, you simply select the virtual machine that's in the instant restore mode and say migrate to production, and then it'll present you with options like, do you want to overwrite the old one? Do you want to make a new virtual machine with a new name? So there's a lot of options there, and we have used this. We use this all the time, and there's so many great use cases for it. Instant disk recovery is essentially the same thing. It'll present the VMDK file from the virtual machine that can be mounted on a different virtual machine if only certain contents need to be extracted. Restore entire virtual machine is essentially overwriting. That's the typical use case for it, but you could also restore it to a different location or to a different host. Essentially the same with the virtual disk. Restore VM files is, if you wanted to actually, like, let's say you deleted the VMX configuration file or messed it up somehow, you can recover the VMX file just from the backup and overwrite the one in production, and for some reason, that's an option. That's probably pretty rare, but in case you needed it. Guest files. So depending on the underlying operating system, you're presented with another additional set of options. So the guest file restore just mounts the backup and presents to you a file explorer window where you can just kind of cherry pick the files that you want, and you can place them individually either back into production or elsewhere, and you can choose to preserve the permissions or overwrite them or make them clear the ACLs out completely. For Linux, a small proxy appliance is created that essentially allows you to access the files using standard Linux tools and copy them back over into production. And this is the greatest option ever, is the restore application items. So essentially, like I mentioned, it recognizes that this is a Microsoft Exchange server. And then once I click on this, it's going to launch the Exchange Explorer, which actually I can do. I can select my restore point. So we'll say, hey, we'll do last night. Okay. Now this is the Russian interface I was mentioning to you. We get so many calls because people are like, yeah, I want to go back to this restore point, and then they hit next and they're like, oh my God, what's going on? Did I just activate it? Is it going to overwrite? Panicky calls. No, what this is happening is that we're instructing the Explorer to load. So you'll hit finish or next or whatever. And in some systems, it's going to take like 5 minutes or whatever, however long it takes, to pull the database information and mount the file itself. It'll just sit here, so people are panicking and thinking that they just restored something. So I'm like, no, it's going to open up the Explorer so you can do cool stuff with the recovery, like recover mailboxes or mail items. So this is actually a very large Exchange server, so this might take some time, but I think we can still do stuff while we wait. Any questions about the restore options?
No, not at this time.
Okay, cool. The disk imported is essentially if you have that backup chain from like a different system, or one that you had in your safety deposit box that you brought back in here, you can just import the backup itself. So you just point it to the local server and find the chain. I think I've got some archived here. Yeah, here's a BlackBerry server. Oh,
That was a minute ago.
that was a minute ago. Yeah. And it'll import the chain. It'll check to make sure that all the incrementals or the things that are required are there. And then it'll give me all the restore points that are available for that server. And I can essentially do the exact same functions: restore, instant restore, copy individual files, it's incredibly useful. Oh, well, here's the Exchange database that I initiated a restore for.
So it hasn't overwritten anything yet. You just
Nope.
imported the data in order to see what you're working with.
Yeah, essentially, it's
Okay,
like opening
okay.
up like a zip file on that,
Gotcha.
and just importing it so you can see what's inside of it, and then you can do what you want. So if I wanted to do those same restore functions, they're all here. And they have nothing to do with my backup jobs. They're simply just, I'm just opening up this file and seeing what's inside of it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we have the mailbox now. And then you can explore the items that are in here. And then you can do individual restores. You can restore a particular object itself. Pretty much everything that you would ever need. And you can also search. So it's pretty useful. Compare with production is something that is excellent, especially for legal holds, where there's a suspicion of like maybe employees deleting a bunch of old emails, and then you're comparing the backup itself with what the production environment has, so that as you can see the discrepancy, like, hey, like what happened to these 11,000 emails, right? So it does happen. So it's a very useful feature, and like I said, I just really love that Veeam understands the IT professional, and a lot of vendors, including Protect, they just give you the files. They'll give you the MDB files or EDB files, and they'll say have a nice day, and then you have to go on your own and figure out how to mount them and recover them and do all that fun stuff. You can also export to PST. Some people just do this to archive their own messages or their own mail. They'll go into here and they'll grab their mailbox and they'll export, and then you can essentially do whatever you want with them. So I closed the Explorer, so I just unmounted it, and everything's kind of back where it was at. Veeam Zip is essentially a one-off backup. So that's where that BlackBerry server was. So essentially, instead of, if you don't have a backup job created for a server, you can go into the inventory, locate anything inside of your vCenter, and just do an ad hoc backup called Veeam Zip. And there's even an option where it remembers your previous location. So you can do like external hard drive, for example, or whatnot. And it'll just take a one-time backup and it'll put that chain wherever you want. And then when you import them, it'll go back into the same bucket that it was when it was created. Now the cloud side. And this is where we shine. So all these jobs have restore points on the cloud repository, and they all function exactly like they do in production. So if you're recovering from disk or recovering from the cloud, the same options are presented to you. So I'll select that Exchange server. Okay. Oh, can't do instant recovery, but all the other recovery options are available to you, including application restore, and it's surprisingly fast and efficient. We had one of the things that made UBX internet famous a few years back is that we uncovered the use of a threat group essentially weaponizing a managed service provider software called Kaseya. This was about 2 or 2.5 years ago, and typically these ransomware actors would try to just would try to target like individual organizations, or they would essentially go after large enterprises, people who could afford to pay their ransoms essentially. And this was the first time that a coordinated attack happened against 3 managed service providers using managed service provider only tools. So that is incredibly dangerous, because the impact of that was not only for just the managed service provider themselves, but all their clients and anyone that is essentially using their RMM tools. And that's incredibly dangerous. So we presented evidence to Huntress Labs and to the community as a whole, and said, we have we have documented evidence that this threat group used this tool to spread their ransomware, and infected over 2,000 servers for just that one MSP, because that one MSP was our customer. And the other two MSPs, we don't have any insight onto, but we know that they were infected in the exact same fashion at the exact same time. So it was a very effective way of deploying as much ransomware as possible and extracting Bitcoins from all these different organizations. And we got like the press, it was like crazy. We need like a PR person to get in there. It was really nuts, but we're just a bunch of network and systems engineers, and all of a sudden we're like a big deal in the security space pretty much after that. And quite frankly, we had to be, because our clients were demanding more from cloud security other than just best practices. Like, we have to be proactive about these things. So during that ransomware outbreak, over 2,000 servers that we had to recover, we recovered the first batches within the first 24 hours, all using Cloud Restore. So we did exactly what you're seeing in this menu right here. There was no local backups because they were encrypted. The only thing that was available was the cloud repository. And they encrypted the local Veeam database, so we weren't even able to open this. So we had to essentially, we dropped a template that we have that has the Veeam software already built in to inside of a Windows Server instance. And then we connected it to the client's vCenter, like Delta Force style. And then we were able to pull down the cloud backups. We were able to connect to the cloud repositories and then pull down and restore those backups from the into the production environment. Now, so we selected it and just said, restore entire VM. And there's an option on there where if you restore and overwrite a virtual machine that's already in production, there's an option to compare the blocks that you already have on the local data store. So we were seeing restores that were well in excess of even the WAN connections, because they were running through those blocks very quickly because of either white space, but most of the time it was actually because it was matching those bits while it was restoring. So we restored a ton of servers over 48 hours, and the ones that took the longest were the ones that didn't have cloud backups. So those ones, they had to actually pay the ransom to get the Bitcoin to unlock the backups and then restore everything. So the rest of the environment was restored in 16 days. And that was a lot of downtime for people.
Yeah.
But, and this is exactly what this minimizes. The cloud repository is, it's all a part of the best practices with Veeam. And this is a super important concept with any backups. I want a copy of my backup, one in production, one on site, one off site, right? And on different media. Okay, so tape, hard drive, flash, just something different. And Veeam allows that. You can use the cloud service provider repositories as a secondary repository for these files. And like I mentioned, there is mechanisms in place that do not allow any talk back into our environment. It's completely separate from you. There's no VPN. There's no Brendan got really mad one day and decided to go into Veeam and delete a bunch of backups, because we have contingencies for that as well. So, we have a feature on the service provider end called, oh my God, I just read the name of it, insider protection. So we're protecting you from yourself. So if Ivan ransomware is on your Veeam server and they see that you have offsite backups, they can go through here and delete, right? And they will go in here. I mean, this is deliberate. They know, these ransomware guys know exactly what to do. They're like dark Jedis, they're systems engineers, and they're experienced. These aren't just like common criminals that break into buildings and steal stuff. They're trained. This is a big business for them. So they know where the Veeam backups are. They know how to delete the database and encrypt the database, and they know how to delete offsite backups. Well, like I said, on our end, they can't control our stuff. So we have that feature that says, we have to enable it, and you have to tell us, hey, I want that insider protection for 4 days. So if it happened on a Thursday and we caught it Monday, we're okay. And the insider protection essentially shows you the deletion happened, but on our end, the chains and all the files associated with it are actually moved out of your repository folder into a Veeam recycling bin. And that recycling bin is not accessible to pretty much anyone until we go back and we say, okay, we want to move this back into the customer's bucket so they can recover. So that in itself has been around for about 3 years now, and it's fantastic. And it really prevents these kinds of attempts. Another option, which is a little bit easier, is immutability. And this is a relatively new feature, but essentially, we are, as a cloud services provider, we have the capability of presenting to you object storage, essentially exactly like S3 object storage that you would buy from Amazon. It's literally just a bucket that you can access with, it's a repository that you can access with three bits of information, and you can copy anything you want to it: files, images, X-rays, music, anything. And there are features inside that bucket that are very useful for retaining backups. When we send a backup copy job to an object storage bucket, we have the capability of turning on immutability. So the Veeam software and the bucket talks to each other, and there's a setting in there that says, look, I don't care what time you think it is, anything that I put inside this bucket is, you cannot delete it for 30 days or 7 days or whatever increment that you put in there. And it essentially seals that chain so that nothing can happen to it. And the only way that that data can age out and delete is it actually completes that entire cycle. It's very, it's pretty much complete protection from ransomware at that point. The actual API mechanisms for the deletion and the instructions to delete are completely removed. So there's no way that they can just go in there and just start deleting stuff. It's not like a traditional file system. It's like millions of objects in a bucket. So in the event of a restore, you can, like I said, Delta Force a virtual machine in with the Veeam software installed, or reinstall on a different machine or on someone's desktop, and you can point it to that bucket, and you can recover directly from the bucket, but you can't write back to it. You can't delete it. So we offer that service as a standalone service, and we also offer it as an additional layer to our Cloud Connect infrastructure. The object storage is more of a, it's going to be a slower restore just because of the way that the data is stored versus like on a file system on a hard drive versus a bunch of objects in a bucket. But essentially, it just ensures that there's data protection and continuity outside of the traditional mechanisms of retaining your data copies. I think that's pretty much everything on the restore side. We do have additional functionality that's not shown here. For example, we also can do replication with Veeam, and that's very different from backup. Replication essentially inventories the virtual machines that are in the vCenter, and it will talk to another copy of vCenter somewhere else. So if you have a satellite office and you want to replicate your data there, or your workloads there, you can do that with Veeam. They just have to be, you have to have the available resources on both sides. And you point it to that vSphere cluster, and you can just start replicating your data. So the source virtual machines, much like a backup, they're snapshotted. Usually replication happens like every 4 hours, every 2 hours, every hour, sometimes every half hour. And the virtual machines are snapshotted. The changes are sent over the wire, either layer 2 local internet connection or VPN, or a layer 3, which would be internet. And the changes are the snapshots are deposited not in a backup file, but they're actually the original source format of the virtual machines. So if your source is VMware and it's a VMDK file, your destination is going to be VMware and a VMDK file. All the VMware configuration is duplicated on both sides. So in the event of having to fail over your environment, your primary environment will be down, your secondary environment can come up. So you can power back on those virtual machines. And you can essentially maintain business continuity if the source and destination networks have the exact same network configuration and IPs. And that's typically when you're building a DR environment, you kind of go through that run book and make sure that the destination environment matches. Otherwise, Veeam has the capability of restoring and then changing the IPs of all the restored servers into your new environment. So there's plenty of flexibility there. As a service provider, we offer this as a service on top of the Veeam bundle, the Veeam backup and licensing bundle that we offer. So that way, not only do we have a copy of your data, but we have a copy of your live virtual machines that we can recover from instantly. We simply just power them on. And if you're actually a customer in our cloud, we can do this between data centers, and we can minimize downtime using a technology called continuous data protection, where we essentially can restore you, within like a few minutes of where you were at versus like hours. So, if you're within our data center locations and we're replicating with us, the workload is seamless. So once your production goes down, we turn on your secondary site, and because we're announcing all your IPs and all your network is the same way, nothing needs to happen. No DNS changes, no records changes, no repointing of IPs on the destination side. We just stop the announcement here and turn on the announcement here, and it works. For your purposes, since your environment would be considered hybrid on-premise and cloud, we can't do that instantaneous announcement, but at least we can power on the environment, and we can provide you with remote desktop access to your servers or VPN, or if you have a VPN appliance, you would power that on. And there's a lot of options to get you back into those environments. We recently had one use case that was really interesting. One of our customers is they're scientific lab company. They do like medical research and science research, and they also manufacture heavy equipment for like the medical and pharmaceutical industries. They consolidated their labs after COVID started, and they essentially got like an armored truck. They placed all their servers in this armored truck, and before they decommissioned that site, they essentially said, this truck has millions and millions of dollars of intellectual property that we can't get back if something happens to it. So what we did is they were they're a paying replication customer of ours. We replicated their environment, and then they activated the replicated environment on our end while the truck was moving from the source to the destination. So their business continuity plan was, if that armored truck got hit by another truck or just disappeared, right, or ended up on a plane in China, they have their plan B. Their environment is actually hot and ready right now in the DR environment. So their IT team was connected and remoted in, and they made sure that everything was up and running. The data was there, the databases were there, and it took the entire weekend to set up the new location. And we powered off the environment when we were done, and it was business as usual. And we replicated back the changes. So anything that we did on the DR side, we just, once that site came back online, we sent the changes back over, so that way they're, the point in time of the recovered environment matches the source environment. That
actually reminds me of a little bit of another use case with Veeam is, if one doesn't have, enterprise licensing for Veeam,
migration, quick migration,
the quick migration, to move a machine from one host to another.
Yeah.
Is a really nice.
We have smaller MSPs doing that actually, to do like vMotions and stuff for maintenance. So yeah, exactly. It's like an off-label use for Veeam, to move the workload. So yeah, so you have to have a licensed version of vSphere to be able to do, vMotions. And if you don't want to pay like 50 grand a year for that or whatever it is, you can use Veeam to do that for you using its own software. So it's a little trick. That's a good one too.
Nice.
And it's really interesting because like I am I've been a Veeam evangelist since like 2011, and I just gave a keynote for representing the Asia Pacific market because we are the largest like Veeam consumer in India. So they call it, I'm big in Asia, right? So like we're big in India, and that was really cool. Like I'm so excited to talk about these technologies. I don't know if you guys can tell, but this product has saved so many companies. I mean, I cannot tell you. I can't even fathom, if I look back at my career and say how many companies we recovered with this software that we could only recover with this software. We had a situation last July where a provider called Nuvolot, they hosted, they're like a bare metal hosting company, and they were hosting 150,000 servers across East Coast and West Coast United States. And they gave their customers 2 weeks notice and said, we're filing for bankruptcy and we're liquidating our company. Evacuate your data. Yeah, that was pretty bad. They actually were involved in some other bad stuff, but they didn't give their customers much time, and it was a huge environment. 150,000 servers is a massive footprint. So that's another thing that we were internet famous for, is that we stepped up, and we were like the general contractor offboarding people off of this environment. And we work with 3 other providers. We actually got them involved, and we basically said, this is the situation. We ended up, because we have ties in India, we ended up actually like subcontracting their staff that was all fired after the bankruptcy, to help them recover the environment. And I mean, we recovered. We did the amount of work that was done to save that environment and save those customers. We saved like over 50 US businesses, and the only piece of software we used was Veeam. And these people did not have Veeam to begin with. We used Veeam to migrate them off the environment and get good backups of their environment. And it was definitely a moment in our careers, as a company. Our whole staff was working on this, 3 shifts, 8-hour shifts, or I'm sorry, it was like 16-hour shifts, and did all this. We migrated like petabytes of data, and it was, we got some news from, it was a newsworthy event. So, I feel like if we were using Shadow Protect or using any other product out there, it wouldn't have happened. We were doing things like converting a Hyper-V server that was originally bare metal, that was physical to virtual converted, that was a terabyte. I'm sorry, 32 terabytes. Yeah, that was 32 terabytes. And we converted it into VMware and deposited that VM in our cloud while we were downloading it. Like in the middle of the middle of the transaction, we're converting the virtual machine. So it's like jumping on the race car as it's driving down the road while it's on fire. That's the best way that I could kind of give you that analogy. But it was cool. And this was the only piece of software that would do it. I mean, those things are not common scenarios, obviously, but the off-label use of this product is, we use it to save real companies and real data. Let's see. So I covered replication. I covered restores and the different kinds of restore scenarios. I don't think I'm missing anything, but let me know if I am, or if you have any questions.
I do have a question, and you might have covered it and I just didn't quite grasp it.
No problem.
So the full backups and then the chain of incrementals, can we control how long that chain gets before a new full backup is done? And is it easy? Because what we're using right now, the Shadow Protect, we have to do
it's a mess. Yeah, I know.
They call it a rebase is what they call it. And they don't really tell you that you should rebase your stuff. So a couple of months ago, when I happened to be, we started running out of storage all of a sudden. And like, what? Why are we running out of storage? Well, we had this chain that was, 2 years long. Yeah. And heaven forbid, if any piece of that chain had gotten messed up, which it didn't, thank goodness. But if it had, we would have lost all of that data.
Yeah, no continuity there. Yeah, up until the last restore point that was healthy, last chain. Yeah.
Right. So is it easier to manage? And
yes.
and can we do the full backups more often?
Yep. So there's two ways of doing it, and essentially what drives it is essentially the type of backup that you're storing, or the type of your storage repository and how fast it is.
Okay.
So most people do what's called a synthetic full. So you can schedule your backup chain to be a forever incremental. So it just keeps depositing those incremental pieces as you go, and then you can say, hey, every Saturday, I want to synthesize an independent new chain, a full backup from the repository chain that's there. So that way you'll still get your forever incremental, it'll keep going, but then you'll have that synthetic full that is a complete and valid restore point as a full file.
Okay.
And then you can do whatever you want with that chain. It's not connected to the existing one. But my only, actually I was sitting in a conference and I taught someone this, and he's like, you changed my life, because they were doing it a little bit differently. It was a little bit more complicated. This just really simplified the abilities to create synthetic fulls. There's also a way that you can do active fulls. So the synthetic fulls uses the IO resources on that, that local repository or that NAS box. In your case, since you're using a direct attached server, I think that you guys are using a direct attached server, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Your IO should be fine. Synthetic operations are going to run really fast. If you're using like a commodity NAS appliance, you're not going to get a lot of good IOPS, and there's no caching and stuff like that. So things are going to be much slower. So on your end, if you have this server with all the direct attached disks, the transformations are very rapid. So that's when you would use a synthetic full, because it's putting the stress on your local repository and it's not touching anything in production. It's doing it all in the repository. So that's a good use case of that. If you're backing up to a target that is slow and just the transformations are taking too long, or it's essentially killing the IO on that box, then you can do an active full. So it just creates a new full from your production environment and then deposits that on the repository as a separate independent file. And in our case, I would say 90% of the cases that we see, synthetic is fine. It's only in those constrained IO, the smaller environments, where an active full is actually faster. It's faster to write the data sequentially from the source than it is to actually synthesize it from the repository.
Okay.
And
okay, good.
That we've actually gotten customers out of the Shadow Protect hell because of that. Like the amount of chain management in that product is just astronomical.
Yes.
We were Shadow Protect partners from 2007 to 2010 or so. And I'm talking to one of the channel managers, and I'm like, listen, I go, if you don't go virtual, this product's not going to survive. And it's sad to say that, because they essentially invented the volume shadow copy service that everyone uses. So they just did not think that their product, they said they'll never go virtual. That was their stance. So like when I see products like Norton, like Symantec Backup Exec, Brendan, you remember, buddy? Yeah. So I have shirts that we wear at conferences that says, friends, don't let friends use Backup Exec. So
I used to use Backup Exec years ago.
I've never ever had a successful recovery, not once. And it was tapes. It was always a tape library.
Yep.
Never recovered anything.
Hundreds of
systems.
tapes.
Yep.
Hundreds of tapes.
Yeah. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. I can't use this software anymore.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And that's what I said, I'm very sympathetic to people who have to, especially IT managers who are responsible for this data, and they're just not using the right tools for it. So at least when you're looking at alternatives, I would say from a standpoint as an alternative to Veeam, Shadow Protect was the bee's knees for physical, and in some cases it still is, but not in mixed workload environments, not in multi-cloud environments. It just did not innovate fast enough, unfortunately. And
Gotcha.
Veeam is the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for backups, and and I would say in this case it's well justified.
So let me ask you this then. The contractor that we currently buy the Shadow Protect from is trying to push us to move to Axient. Are you familiar with that? AXCIENT.
It's a managed service provider product, but it's essentially I think it's essentially two different technologies that are kind of put together, if I remember. I don't think it's its own standalone backup software. I think they're licensing someone else's. I could be wrong. I could be confusing it with something else.
It doesn't look as friendly, and they hide a lot of stuff from us. That's our major frustration is they're holding on to things so that they can charge us to do things that we could do ourselves.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I'm kind of tired of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I see this a lot. And we actually, the majority of our customer base is managed service providers. So we, our value to them is like, look, your managing backups and offsite backups are an important part of managing your client relationships, and stop using garbage, right? Because they're using garbage. All the stuff, Datto, all that stuff. I mean, I would much rather use enterprise off-the-shelf software, buy a tremendous amount of those licensing, and essentially bundle it with our services, because I know that when it comes to recovery, it's well documented. It's standards based. It's not an MSP only tool to generate revenue or to just restore files. It's an enterprise tool to restore whole companies. And every product has its ups and downs, and Veeam has definitely, I would say, the worst error messages on the planet. That's where the Russian programming comes into play. I joke about that, but it's almost like an inside joke, but it's a funny joke. So they, especially early on in their earlier versions, they just did not have a grasp of how to explain error messages. So they're really cryptic and non-descriptive, and sometimes don't even relate to the errors they're telling you. It's more on us because we're a service provider and we help customers manage these environments, where it's like, oh, the error is your certificate is expired. Okay, we look, certificate's fine. There's no problem with the cert, right?
Which one? Where?
Yeah.
Why?
And we're literally we're forensically analyzing logs with Veeam, and it's like, here's the error, here's the code, we look it up, and that's not the problem. The problem is actually that the backup repository that's serving that environment is having a problem, and that tripped up something in the service provider environment, and they returned an error code on the cert, and it has nothing to do with the cert. Okay. Then the other one was it was the certificate revocation list. The certs need to have access to the internet. If let's say Komodo issued the certificate, they have to access Komodo servers using HTTP to confirm that the certificate is valid and the chain's valid. And if you block access to the internet, it'll say, if you block access to the internet, if you're only opening up port 443 or whatever, and you're blocking traffic to everything else, it can't validate that certificate. So then the error comes back something like, proxy issue. And I'm like, it has nothing to do with the cert, zero. So, they're actually, it's funny because they're a huge company now. They're investing money in doing some kind of artificial intelligence to correlate support tasks and error codes and errors into actual step-by-step how to fix it. So it's really funny because they just can't figure that out yet. So, so I'm like, you're inventing an entire system to explain the errors that are cryptic to begin with. Okay, great. So, but the good thing is that those are rare, but when they happen, it's a little confusing, and there's a lot of back and forth. We generate huge log files, and then you've got to analyze them. But that's where we come in. We're experts in this software. We're Veeam certified. We typically fix things before they do. And they've actually used us to supplement their staff, especially when India got hit with COVID. They had 4 core engineers on the service provider side that were supporting enterprise customers and other service providers. And essentially, because of COVID, there was no support. They were white labeling us to provide support to help supplement their support team. It was really interesting. I mean, I just said, whatever you guys need, whatever we can do to help. And it was just crazy. It was such a bad incident with India. But, we're the experts, so we can help you with that. And when it comes to, we want you to be able to restore your data and recover it, right? So the way that we can, the way that we can, if there's anything that we can do to make that easier for you, right? Like the restore to door, or even sending you like, pre-built ISOs with the drivers injected into them for whatever servers that you're using bare metal on. That's a thing, because if you've got that one SQL server in the back, that's got like, a tile falling on it with water pouring on it or something. And
Were you secretly here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you peek?
Yeah, I peek. And if it's bare metal, then you can, it's not as easy. Like the restoring from a virtual environment is very smooth. Well, for a physical server, you need drivers, you need all this stuff. And I've done this where we've extracted the drivers from the server using the Veeam software, created the ISO, and just said, look, here's a little manila envelope with a USB drive with the the SHIT, I swear a lot. This is if you open this up, this is going to save your butt, because all you have to do is plug it into that server and point it to the repository to restore, or point it to the cloud repository to restore, and you don't need anything else. Because the last thing that you want is you restore that physical server and you power it up and it goes inaccessible boot device, blue screen,
Right.
and not on my watch. So if you have that old, that tinted beige, that yellowish beige server looking in the back, yeah,
we got one of those.
So my first pitch would be migrate to the cloud and the backup is included, right? That'd be like, we'll just take care of all that problem for you. No more beige box, no more tiles. Even if you're just doing, the way that I look at it is like, look, if you're going to keep your infrastructure on premise, and for sometimes there's a really good reason for that, then at least protect it. And if you're going to go into the cloud, then make sure your data is somewhere in another cloud, or somewhere else. So, or make sure there's some kind of plan for that data being elsewhere. So,
okay,
cool.
Very good. I think I have all my questions answered at this time. There may come some more.
So I normally don't do these kinds of interactions, but I'm very excited to do this again. So I appreciate the opportunity to at least talk about these technologies that I'm so passionate about. I might actually use this as a training mechanism if you guys are okay with that.
Sure.
Okay, like I don't think we discussed anything proprietary about your company or anything like that, but okay,
no,
cool.
No.
Because these are real world questions that people ask and they want to know and actually find a way to do these things, because sending you to a knowledge base with 80 chapters on recovery, the only person who likes reading that is me. Okay. Like I'm there's a new release, okay, and I want to know about it. Yay. Okay. You guys got bigger fish to fry than that. So, you don't
many more things to do.
Yeah, you don't want to open the encyclopedia and figure out like how do I restore, how do I restore an SAP database, right? Like that should not happen at any point. So, so yeah, this is helpful. Even some of the more advanced restoral options that I demonstrated. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I was pretty excited, and was it like halfway through version 10, or maybe it was version 11. When it came out, that they finally supported high DPI displays on the management interface. I couldn't use the darn thing at all on my PC.
Yeah,
I had to use a laptop to get to my backups because it was just unusable on the 4K display.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that again, Russian programming, right? Yuri in the back, who was coding that, didn't think that anyone was going to use anything bigger than a 13-inch monitor, because that's all they have in Mother Russia. Okay.
Right.
And unfortunately, yeah, they finally got on that plane. Our solution for that was to enable Enterprise Manager. Enterprise Manager allows you to manage multiple sites. So if you have I would say if you have more than like 4 sites, it's probably worth deploying. It's included in our package, but it essentially connects all the Veeam instances together and then provides you a web-based interface to manage it all. So no issues. And then you can actually manage it on the service provider side. So if we, as a part of our onboarding, we link your on-premise Veeam environment to our Veeam console, or it's a web portal that we manage on our end. And you get a pretty dashboard that shows like your backups, the last backup, the size of your backup, how many items are backed up, what failed, and it's got some good visuals, and you can expand and include anyone can walk up to that console in your company and they can see exactly where they are point in time with everything. So that's really helpful in getting some visibility things. Yeah, and we provide that, and you can actually edit backup jobs. You can change schedules. You can re-kick off a backup job. So it's not as it tries to approximate the Veeam console as much as possible, but as with any thick application versus web application, you're going to lose a little bit. It's not going to be quite as smooth when you're walking through some of these processes, and it's only a modification only. You can't actually restore anything from that portal. You can just change and view. Okay. So that's free. It's included in our services, and a lot of people who are managing backup like workstations and laptops, that's heavily used. More so for Veeam backup and replication customers, they're just going to use the normal tools to work with it. But you have the option. Okay. Cool.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was really great talking to all of you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And this software provides tremendous value, and I hope that like at the end of my demonstration that that you see that it's a good tool. And I don't want your MSP hitting you with the charge stick either. I mean, that's always a bonus, right? But essentially, getting the right tool for the job is I would say is the main business objective. Rather than saving money, or saving money is like a secondary thing, but you just want to make sure that you can recover.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions, I'll conclude this. But again, it was a pleasure with everyone, and always good talking to you, Brendan.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
You got it. All right. Bye.
Thanks.